Yes, Ronnie first invited me to visit you guys 20 years ago, but one of the greatest user group visits ever for me was when I came and spoke to you in the 90s, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I understand that this is the last meeting of the group, and wow, that is so sad, but so much a reflection of the times, and I'm so honored to be your final speaker. No one can ever say that they came after me for this group. Tuesday is a really big day for me. For 2 years, I've been working on this. So, it's the complete history. I interviewed 150 people. Yeah, if you don't want to buy the book, just screenshot this really fast. But yeah, it was a joy. It was so much fun. I hung out with all these cool people, and then it took like another year just to get the rights to the photos. But anyway, so I thought maybe today, if I could get my screen sharing to work. Let's see, allowed to share screen, and let's see if does this work? Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Looking good.
You can see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the talk. So this all began 2 years ago, February 2024, was the 40th anniversary of the Mac. You might have heard of it. And Mac, for that event, for the Mac celebration, the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, invited all the creators of the Mac who are still alive back to the stage, and I interviewed them. From left to right, that's Bill Atkinson and Steve Capps, who went on to become the Newton guy, and Andy Hertzfeld, and then that's Susan Kerr on the and then that's Bruce Horn, who did the Finder, and then Susan Kerr on the right, who drew the icons, the original fonts, pixel by pixel, and it was an amazing event. On YouTube, you should go watch it as you saw in your copy about the closure of this user group. But it was humor and storytelling and PTSD, and they told about how Steve, they're all 20, 22 years old, they were all artists and musicians, photographers, and Jobs just drove them into the ground. Do you know that the entire Macintosh was created by 15 engineers? Can you imagine 15 people? Anyway, so a few weeks later, after this unbelievable event, my wife, that's Nikki, she woke me up in the middle of the night. She goes, wake up, I have a good idea for a book. I'm like, what? She goes, you should do a book about the 50th anniversary of Apple. Because, I've covered Apple for decades, Macworld and the New York Times. And I literally shuddered.
Oh, no.
So, she goes, oh, sorry. But in the morning, I woke up and I looked it up, and it was 2 years away. It was 2026. And so, you know how when you have an idea in the middle of the night, it seems like a good idea, but you're not really sure. It's not always really a good idea. So I called my editor, and she said, oh, yeah, do this book at Simon Schuster. And so, here we are. So, Apple is just staggeringly big. Until the AI revolution 2 years ago, it was the biggest company in the world by stock market value. It's now number 3 after NVIDIA and Microsoft. But 27% of the global population is carrying around an Apple device right now. That's 2.2 billion people. If they were a country, they would be bigger than China, bigger than India. They would be the biggest country in the world. Apple sells 220 million iPhones a year, which generates $1 million every 90 seconds. So next time you're feeling your income, just prove that. They are approaching a $4 trillion market capitalization. They were the world's first company to hit $1 trillion, and then they hit $2 trillion and then $3 trillion. If you were to draw a 50-year graph of Apple's success, their stock price and their corporate value. So it was when Jobs came back in 1997 the Apple we know really caught fire. The opening of the book is this 2-page spread, and it shows all the key places in the Apple story. And what's interesting about this is that in 50 years, Apple has never moved more than 2 miles from where it began, right in the dead center, just below the center line. You'll see 1997 first office. That was a little rented office. And then you can see the family campus, and then they moved to Infinite Loop, and then they moved in 2017 to Apple Park. It's really extraordinary how little this company has changed in 50 years. I mean, there are other old companies, very few, but like Samsung started out as a dried fish vendor, and Nokia was a paper mill. But Apple is still doing the same thing now that it was born to do, which is taking advanced technologies and simplifying and friendlyifying them into a way that the masses can use. This is what the book looks like. Lots and lots of photos, and these little sidebars, these little blue boxes, these are little anecdotes that you can read later or spice up the main narrative. They're just fun stories. Excuse me, I'm breathing in some dust. But I really think they make it much more lively.
There's a lot of prototypes. I argue that Apple, there are more products you haven't heard of
than the ones you have, because they get canceled at the last minute or whatever. So 150 interviews that include Woz and John Scully, who was the CEO for 10 years. There's Johnny Ive. It's been a wonderful day with him. There's Bill Atkinson himself. What's a real tragedy and a blessing is that this book came along at just the right time to catch these guys. 4 of these guys have died or developed dementia since the interview, so they can no longer speak to us. And Bill Atkinson was one of them. The interview I did with him was his last interview, and 3 months later, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and 4 months after that, he was gone. So really meaningful. The tough part was what to do about the recent years, because I really wanted to interview current designers and executives and engineers, and Apple has a rule that they don't talk to media. They do not make current employees available unless it's a very special setup with the Wall Street Journal to make some point. And so, for 6 months I harangued Apple, and I'm like, let me interview these people. It's a historic book, it's an important project. And they said, well, can we have editorial control over your book? And they said, no, that's not the deal. So we were kind of in a standoff. And finally they said, okay. 6 months later they said, okay, come to Apple Park and we'll schedule a day of interviews with you, an hour at a time with all the key people. And I went out there 4 times for these days of interviews. So there was Craig Federighi and Greg Jazwiak, current head of global marketing. There's Eddie Q, who's the head of services. There's Bill Schiller, and of course there's Tim Cook. So it was an amazing experience. Often I would end the interview by saying, there actually is no book. I just wanted to hang out with you. So here's some fun facts about Apple that you guys as Mac nerds, you might know some of these, but some of them will be new to you. Apple didn't start in a garage. It started at HP on Woz's desk. Apple was Woz and Jobs' 4th business venture together, not their first. That included the blue box, telephone dialer, and a couple other things. There was a 3rd founder. We'll get to that. Steve was not Apple's first CEO. He wasn't his 2nd, 3rd, or 4th CEO. He was Apple's 5th CEO. He didn't make up the name Macintosh or come up with the concept. In fact, the guy who did, he fired. John Scully did not fire Steve Jobs, contrary to popular lore and the movies. The tablet, which you know is the iPad, actually came before the phone. It was put on hold. There's this old myth that Jobs would say to someone in the elevator, "What do you do here?" And if you didn't like your answer, he would fire you on the spot. Never happened. So I thought maybe today I would give you my favorite 50 stories from this book, Apple the First 50 Years. But Taylor was really grumpy and rigid about this. He said, we didn't have 11 hours. So I'm going to cut it down to my favorite 15 stories. Let's see if I can fit them in the next 45 minutes. First of all, I mentioned there's a third founder. Jobs had a job at Atari, and he was doing, so as you know, Woz came up with what we now call the Apple I. It's just a circuit board. And Jobs said, well, how about we sell this? And so they went into business together, but Jobs said, by the way, any intellectual property you come up with for our little project, you know that Apple the company is going to own it. You won't own it, and HP won't own it. And Woz was really nervous about that. He did not like the idea of cheating on his boss, HP. So Jobs got this guy, Ron Wayne, who was a 41-year-old tech at Atari, to sort of mediate this dispute between the two of them. And he did. He talked Woz down. And that night, April 1st, 1976, Ron sat down at his typewriter and drew up this little partnership agreement. And that was the founding of Apple. So Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs each had 45%. And to thank him for his intervention, they gave Ron Wayne 10% of the company. And so Ron got to work. He wrote the first warranty card. He did the first logo. He was a good draftsman. But then Steve Jobs got a $15,000 advance, a loan, to buy the parts for the Apple I. And so that meant that Ron Wayne was on the hook for $1,500. And remember, this was not like a corporation. Like Steve Jobs was barefoot and stinky. He did not have any hygiene to speak of. He ate weird foods. They were both scrubby. And like, was he really going to go into business with these two 21-year-old, like 20 years guys? So Ron Wayne was really nervous, and he'd been burned with a previous startup recently and lost a lot of money. So he was sort of gun shy. And after 11 days, he said, you know what, I'm not in for another entrepreneur startup roller coaster. I'm out. So he went to the registrar's office in Santa Clara County and took his name off the agreement. Steve Jobs paid him $800 as thanks. The percent that he held would now be worth $350 billion. So he says, though, he explains, that he did what he had to do with the information he had at the time, and he's never starved. And I really wanted to get him for the book. He apparently lives in a trailer park in Las Vegas now. And I emailed him, I wrote to him, no response. And then on Tuesday, this coming week, I'm doing, Wednesday, I'm hosting a big event at the Computer History Museum where this all started. And lo and behold, who pops up out of the woodwork at age 90? But Ron Wayne. He's going to be there at this thing. This was a Zoom call where we were talking about this big event. That's him. That's Ron Wayne. He's going to be there, and I'm finally going to interview him. I'm going to hop off the stage and have a roving cameraman. I'm going to come with a microphone and interview Ron Wayne about that fateful decision. So he resurfaced after all these years. He's never done an interview. Second story I want to tell you is Bill Atkinson, who's the genius behind the first graphic interface, which was not for the Macintosh, as I'm sure you guys know. It was for the Lisa computer, which preceded the Mac. This is where they took the ideas they'd seen at Xerox PARC on that fateful visit in 1979, and they saw the mouse, and overlapping windows, and menus, and black text on a white screen, which had never happened before. And so Jobs was like, this is the future! Tear up everything we've been doing on the Lisa, we're going to make it a graphic computer. But Bill Atkinson had a real problem with one thing. See how the windows overlap there? He couldn't get it to work. Well, he could, but when he moved a window aside, it didn't immediately reveal what was behind it in the window in the background. Instead, it would sort of flicker white, and then it would paint itself slowly with the image should be there. And he just couldn't remember how Xerox had done that. And because these things had so little memory and such slow horsepower, he just couldn't get it to work. So he spent weeks on it. Finally, he came up with this brilliant concept called QuickTime regions, quick draw regions, where he would sort of store the image of just the rectangle where it was overlapping, and he would store that image off the screen. Anyway, Jobs was like, you did it! Now when you move a window aside, it immediately shows you what was under there, just like real pieces of paper. And then, this is the part not everybody knows, shortly thereafter, Bill Atkinson was at a nudist colony in the redwoods of California, in the hot tub. This is an AI recreation. He gets into the tub with him and says, oh, you're Bill Atkinson. You're that genius who figured out how to do overlapping windows. He goes, well, yeah, and it was a lot of work. And then he goes, hi, I'm Bill Wilcox. I work at Xerox. Man, I can't believe you solved that. We never got there. And Atkinson was like, what? I saw it. When I visited Xerox, I saw that. And this guy goes, no, you didn't. You must be misremembering because we haven't licked that problem. So Bill Atkinson created overlapping windows only because he misremembered so the Mac was Steve Jobs' attempt to take everything that was great about the Lisa and make it much smaller and much less expensive. It was going to be $1,000 originally. This is the tiny team that created the Mac. And on the left is Jerry Manick's original pencil sketch for what it would look like. I found this in the Stanford University archives, which I went and visited and pawed through old documents. I don't know if you remember how wonky and crashy and bad that operating system was. I mean, there were no icons in list view, and there was always a folder called empty folder. As soon as you named it, a new empty folder would pop up. There was no new folder command. There was always an empty folder waiting for you. But there was only 128 GB of memory, and the operating system took about 96K of it. So it was gasping for memory. And this will become a really, really important factor in the story of Apple. So Andy Hertzfeld in the light blue shirt in the center there worked magic trying to make this thing boot up and run one program on so little memory. I don't know if you remember, but Mac writes, the longest document you could create was 10 pages long. That's how little memory this thing had. So we'll get to why this was such an important point. Steve Jobs, I read that Walter Isaacson book, 600 pages, and he came around, in my opinion, not really knowing Steve Jobs. I didn't get the idea, I was familiar with him at this point. And one huge thing that was missing was how freaking hilarious and weird he was. So, at one point, he burst into the Mac office while they were developing the Mac in 1983. He's like, guys, I have it! Mr. Macintosh! And they're like, what are you talking about? He said, so, we're going to have this little guy, a little cartoon guy, and once every 1,000 times that you open a menu, instead of the menu commands, there's going to be this little guy, and he's just going to wave at you and disappear. And you'll open the menu again, you're going to get it back, but you won't be able to. It'll be like this little flick of an eye. Did I imagine that? It'll be so funny, once every 1,000 times. And everybody loved the idea. In the end, they were so memory constrained in the ROMs that they couldn't fit it in. But they did hire this Belgian artist, Baudon, to draw Mr. Macintosh. And to this day, he exists only in one place. And it's on the original prototype Mac motherboard. There he is. There's Mr. Macintosh. And by the way, very similar. I don't think this story's ever been told. This is another AI generated thing. But when they were about to sell the millionth Mac, Jobs got all fired up. It's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a golden ticket in the box of the millionth Mac we ship. And whoever wins it is going to get an all-expenses-paid flight to Cupertino. I'm going to dress up like Willy Wonka. I'm going to give them a tour. It'll be so cool. They'll get like $10,000 worth of Macs, and they did it. The art department had the ticket printed up. The whole thing was well on its way until the lawyers got involved. It said, unfortunately, by California law, you can't have a sweepstakes that requires a purchase. They all have to be no purchase necessary. So I don't know how you're going to do this with no purchase necessary. So in the end, they shut down that plan, but it just cracks me up. I mean, Jobs had this boyish delight at fun little pranks like that. Macworld magazine, where I wrote for 13 years, was actually secretly funded by Apple. So this is Mike Murray. He was the original Mac marketing guy, and he admired the way there was a whole magazine called PC World for the PCs. And he's like, guys, we gotta make it seem like the Mac is a thing, like there's a whole universe of Mac. And so he got the PC World people to find him a couple of editors, and the problem was there were no software programs or peripherals for the Mac when it came out. It took a long time to build up an ecosystem, so there were no advertisers. If there's no advertisers, before Apple said, okay, fine, you do a beautiful magazine, we'll pay for it. So Apple actually funded Macworld $250,000 for the first year of its life. Now, the 1984 ad, you probably remember this. I don't know if this is going to play video or not. Let's give it a try. Ooh. Apparently not. Okay. Anyway, it was directed by Ridley Scott. It became the most famous commercial of all time. Won every 35 different advertising awards. Didn't show the product. Didn't explain anything about it. It was just this surreal sci-fi vision of Big Brother in a desolate, bleak future, where Big Brother, lower left there, is droning to the mind-washed masses, when all of a sudden this beautiful blonde woman carrying a sledgehammer runs into the room with goons chasing her, and she throws the sledgehammer at the screen, and it explodes. So, a few things about that ad. One, it wasn't originally dreamed up for Apple. The guy at the ad agency, Chiat Day, had thought of this idea a couple of years before and tried to sell it to Nike, tried to sell it to Atari, and everybody thought it was too grim. He even pitched it to Apple for the Apple II, and they all thought it was too weird and too grim. So it took Steve Jobs coming along for the Mac to say, we need something really remarkable, when he said, well, I had this idea. It wasn't originally supposed to be a sledgehammer. It was going to be, what was it, an axe or something? Yeah, at the last minute they changed it to a sledgehammer. Originally there was going to be no dialogue. There was going to be no Big Brother speaking. But what they had to do is they had to hire 200 skinheads from London to play these drone guys. And for the auditions, they wrote up some bleak text. And Ridley Scott thought, well, actually, maybe we should have the Big Brother guy talking during the whole thing. And it was drawn from the audition script. As you know, there was no product to show. And so the board hated the ad. They're like, we want to run this on the Super Bowl. There's going to be two 30-second versions and a 1-minute version. And the board thought, this is the worst ad ever made. This was 2 days before the Super Bowl. They're like, cancel it. Sell off the airtime slot you bought. We are not airing this ad. So Chiat Day sold one of the 30-second spots to Heinz and another one to Hertz, the rental car company. The 60-minute slot, they pretended they couldn't sell. I met a guy who was on the team, and he said, are you kidding me? We didn't even try. We knew this ad had to air. So they told the board, look, we've already paid for the airtime, we can't sell it, we'll have to run it one time. And of course, the rest is history. The Lisa, as we know, was the first consumer device with a graphic user interface and a mouse and overlapping windows, the first computer with a hard drive. It was incredible achievement. It had a megabyte of memory, 4 times what the Mac had. It had multitasking. It had memory protection. It was years ahead of advance. It had stuff the Mac would not have for 20 more years. solution, they wrote a weird little piece of code that would let it run Mac programs, and they rebranded it as the Mac XL. And the purpose of that was to unload the remaining inventory as quickly as they could. What they didn't count on was the Macintosh XL became a huge hit. Everybody wanted one. And they had long since stopped ordering parts and stopped manufacturing the machine. So they didn't have any to sell. It was just a giant, embarrassing, humiliating fiasco. So for a while, they took a bunch of return ones and ones that were broken, and they sold them to this reseller, this guy called Sun Remarketing, and he had a thriving business keeping him alive. And then one day the lawyers called him up and said, yeah, you know that deal we have where we sell broken Lisas to you? That's over. How many do you have left? He said, I have 7,000 Lisas left. And they're like, okay, we're coming for them, which the contract says they can do. They came to his place, they took all those Lisas, drove them into the deserts of Utah, and dumped them in a landfill. 7,000 Lisas dumped into a landfill. It turns out it was a tax write-off. Apple would come out ahead, writing off the value of these unsold computers rather than continuing to sell them to Sun Remarketing. On the 40th anniversary of that, this guy started a GoFundMe to raise money. He was going to dig up the landfill. The abandoned Lisas. He wanted $8,000 for his fundraising campaign. Fundraising he got $40. So the Knowledge Navigator story. This is John Scully. He was the CEO from 1985 to 1993, I believe. 1983 to 1993. He came from Pepsi. He didn't really know anything about technology. He was a great marketing guy. And one of the things he did to market Apple and his technology was he had to give a talk at an educational conference. So he had his team draw a futuristic vision of what computing might look like. And he called it the Knowledge Navigator. And it was like a 6-minute video where this college professor who lives in that house, I don't know what college professor has enough money to live in that house. Anyway, so he opens up what amounts to a folding iPad. It's a touchscreen iPad with an AI video talking agent that says, okay, today you have a meeting at 4:15, and you can talk to him. Look, there's menus, there's a front-facing camera on that thing, stereo speakers. I'll play a little bit of this. So everybody made fun of him for this. It was like, the acting is so cheesy, it's also 80s. You guys, this was 1987. 6 years before the internet even existed. And they got a touchscreen, multi-touch interface, video chat, internet, AI, talking agents. This is, home networking. They basically nailed every single thing we have today. All of it came to pass. And there's a good Substack column to be written on whether this thing predicted those developments or affected those developments. In other words, did people see this and say, hey, that was kind of a cool idea? But anyway, really amazing to look back and see how many things it led to. And it also led to a series of sequels that everybody forgets about. I found them. On the left is this tiny trackpad-based microcomputer that you fit in your pocket. On the right is a flat-screen computer. Does that remind anybody of anything? That is the iMac of 2046 right there. On the right, Apple's first concept for goggles. Like the Vision Pro, only at this point, notice the guy is putting a floppy disk into them. They weren't quite sure where this was going. Some of you might have known the Sosumi story from my own books, but it's the greatest story. So, when Apple was founded, they got sued by Apple Records. That's the Beatles' record company, for using the word Apple. They thought that would confuse people. So, Apple won the case by arguing before the judge that they're not a music company. They're not. No one would be confused by the products because they don't make music. So then, when the Mac came out a few years later, they introduced a microphone. When the Mac LC came out, it had a microphone, and you could choose your error beat. And so they wanted to be very careful that they were not getting into the music business. They didn't want to be sued again because of that agreement with Apple Records. So Jim Reeves was this 20-something guy in charge of all the audio at Apple. And so he made these different audio error messages, and they were all onomatopoeias. They were all named for the sound. Drop, flip, whack, wild, eep, all these things. But one of them was this E-flat diminished chord that was very much a musical chord. And he called it something like chord. And the lawyer's like, chord is a musical term. If you do that, it says we're getting into the music business and we will be sued. Change the name. And he's like, all right, how about notes? And like, no. Notes, that's a musical term. You can't do that. And so he's like, name it something else. So he's sitting around drinking beers with his buddies that afternoon. We're kind of tossing a Nerf football back and forth. And like, this is so stupid. This is not getting into the music business. This is so dumb. I should just call it, chord and be done with it. You know what? So sue me. So they renamed it Sosumi, and that chord was called Sosumi for the next 17 years. The Newtons, of course, were a tremendous flop, but man, was handheld computing hot in the early 90s. These are all prototypes. None of these saw the light of day. One on the left is called Scribe. One in the top middle was based on a Sony handheld computer that this guy on a Paul Mercer on a side project, he built them into new cases. The lower right was the original Newton. And that big lens on the top right, they call that the Eye of Sauron. And it was for infrared beaming. So you and your buddies could show up in the boardroom, and you could take a note or make a little sketch and beam it to everybody else's Newtons, which was really cool and revolutionary. Instant ad hoc networking without Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And it was wide area. Like you could beam it to everybody's Newtons at once. The only problem was they discovered that fluorescent lighting interferes with infrared transmission. In other words, this didn't work in office environments. So that could be considered a drawback. So they ultimately had to get rid of that feature. But I interviewed the guy who designed this, Robert Bruner. He was the Johnny Ive before Johnny Ive. And when Scully wanted to introduce the Newton, he wanted to do it on stage by reaching into his blazer pocket and pulling it out. And they just could not make this thing quite small enough for the blazer pocket. They would flatten the stylus and shave off a millimeter and then go into Scully's office at night and into the blazer that was hanging in the closet to try to wedge it. And they became convinced that Scully had the only blazer in the world that was 2 millimeters smaller than the standard, because it fit in every other blazer. But 4 times they had to go back to the drawing board and shave a little more, just so it fit into this one blazer in one closet for one CEO. And they finally got it. They finally made it so he could just get into his pocket. But that's why the Newton was the way that it is. In the 90s, trackballs were things that hung off of laptops like this. Like the tray table was not big enough for those things, so it would stick out into the aisle of the airplane, and the flight attendant would smash it off with the drinks cart going by. So look at where the keyboard is. keyboard is up against the front edge of the laptop. Why? Because of typewriters. Laptops are meant to be resembling typewriters for the mass public who've never seen one before. So they put the keyboard close up to the front edge, just where people were used to it. So deep inside Apple was this guy named John Krakauer. He was not a designer. He was a systems integrator. His job was to figure out how to get the components on the Mac Portable here. This was Apple's first laptop, if you can call it that, 16 pounds. But to make the circuit board and the hard drive and all these components work well together. The portable bombed because it weighed 16 pounds, and Krakauer was so bummed that on a tour of New York for PR purposes, there was a life-size brochure, well, nearly life-size, of the portable. He cut the pieces apart, the keyboard, the screen, the trackball, and started playing with them. He's like, what if we rearranged the components on this thing? And he made a model that looked like this, where the keyboard was pushed way back up against the screen. And immediately, that made three things better. First of all, it gave you palm rests. Second, it lets you put the trackball right in the middle, no longer hanging off the edge, but in the middle where you could reach it with your thumb, even without taking your fingers off the keys. And thirdly, it meant that the heavy components inside, that used to be where the keyboard is in this picture, could move forward to the front edge underneath, which changed the balance of weight. So now, your laptop was less likely to flop off the back of your knees. Anyway, it looked really weird to people inside Apple, and a lot of people said no. But Krakauer, after hours, would slip into a conference room. He said he'd never get away with this today at Apple with all the security, but he invited 45 people, friends, coworkers, to come in and give it a try. Test it, he would try different versions of it, how big should the trackball be, and everybody agreed this was so much better a layout. So Robert Bruder took a look, and he's like, oh my God, that is how a laptop should be. So that was the PowerBook, and that was the first successful Apple laptop. And when I mean successful, I mean crazy successful. $1 billion worth of sales in the first year. It was all based on Gary Krakauer's self-motivated design. And ever since, no laptop has ever been made using the old design. That came from Apple. So we're about a year now. And Apple was 6 weeks from bankruptcy. They went through 3 CEOs in 5 years. It was such a disaster. There were these fiefdoms, there was duplication, they had 12 different ad campaigns going on, some of which contradicted each other. My favorite story of this whole thing, Phil Schiller told me that at one point, there was a day when 2 Apple lawyers showed up in trademark court to sue each other. It just cracks me the hell up. This company was so dysfunctional, and after all the Mac still didn't have an operating system. It didn't have multitasking, it didn't have real multitasking, and it didn't have memory protection. So one program would crash, your whole Mac would crash. So Gil Amelio, whatever else you want to say about this guy, he did see the future. He did know that they needed a real operating system. So they got into negotiation with former Apple executive Jean-Louis Gasset, who had started up a company called B, and they developed a computer called the B.
The BOS. BOS.
It was a tower, and it ran BOS, which was based on Unix and had multitasking and all that stuff. So Apple was in negotiations to buy them when somebody over at Next, this developer relations guy named Garrett Rice, found out that Apple was shopping for an OS. Now, Next was Steve Jobs' company. While he was gone, he started this company for advanced computers for universities and researchers. It failed, me, you should be buying us. And Apple's, Ellen Hancock, who's at Apple, said, I actually never thought of that. Why don't we have a showdown between the two of you? So they set this up for late 1996, and Jean-Louis Gasset gave his demo, and Steve Jobs gave his demo of NextOS, and it was no contest. Jobs was such a better presenter. They had 5 QuickTime videos playing at once while typing in a word processor, and it didn't skip a beat. It was incredible. So Apple dumped the bought Next and brought Steve Jobs back to Apple. And the reason I know this is because I found and interviewed Garrett Rice, and he told me this story. And I'm like, did anybody ever thank you? And he goes, oh yeah, Steve had a big all-hands meeting at Next, and he handed me a check for $20,000 for making that call that I thought would get me fired. So yeah, so Steve Jobs came back to Apple. That's Bill Amelio, the CEO on the right. This is so funny. Go to YouTube and look up the keynote where Amelio brought Jobs back. The teleprompter stopped working. So Amelio didn't have his notes. So he rambled on for 3 hours. And the one more thing was supposed to be bringing Steve Jobs and then Woz back on stage. And Woz was Jobs was backstage getting more and more pissed off. Just, he was so over this waiting around during this terrible speech. You can see how thrilled he looks right there. But yeah, what he found was a mess. Apple was an absolute mess. Just a little quote from the book. Under the CEO Spindler, the system of selling a different Mac to every store chain developed into an explosion model. The Mac LC475, the Quadra 605, and the Performer 476 were all the same computer. At one point, Apple introduced 7 different Performers in the 6200 family, differentiated only by details like the modem speed or the software bundle. All told, in 5 years, Apple introduced 10 Quadras, 28 PowerBooks, and 45 Not even the most rabid Apple supporters could tell you the difference between a Performance 6410 and a 6360, or between a PowerBook 540C and a 550C. The model multiplication was baffling even to computer store salespeople. They sometimes didn't even bother displaying them in the store. So they had a talent drain. The board was all these old white men. The products were inferior. The marketing was a mess. All these managers were at war. They started this ill-fated cloning program where other companies could build Macs and sell them at lower prices. The distribution channel was a mess. If you could believe it, Steve Jobs fixed all of this in 1 year. It is widely considered the greatest turnaround in corporate history. He made Apple profitable in a year. And part of that was Apple was selling 50 Mac models. And he said, this is ridiculous. We're going to make 4. 2 consumer products, 2 pro products. And it was not a popular decision. I mean, people quit over this. These engineers had huge amounts of R&D invested in upcoming new product lines. And Jobs said, no, we're canceling that. We're canceling the Newton. We're canceling the Performa. We're canceling our entire printer division. We're canceling our software division in France. We're shutting down the advanced technology group. And it was ruthless. He cut so much stuff and said, if we focus on 4, then we could put our top engineers on all 4. We could make every single one of these things amazing. And then he met Johnny Ive, the chief of Apple's design department, who was about to quit. He had all these cool designs, and no one in the company was interested in them. He had never even met the CEO. Jobs fell in love with Johnny Ive's way of thinking, with his prototypes. He began hanging out in the design studio, and he had lunch with Johnny Ive every single day to obsess over every single detail of every single machine. And that, as we know, is what led to the iMac, which became the best-selling computer in the history of the world, despite having no curves, no floppy drive, no printer port, and no beige. And then came the iPod, which, oh my God, was the first time time Apple had ever sold anything in the hundreds of millions. It totally changed what Apple was, became a consumer electronics company. A lot of people forget what a brilliant presenter Jobs was. His keynotes were the greatest shows on earth. And there's a whole chapter on these in the book because you can find them on YouTube, some of these, and they are just screamingly funny. Like when Mac OS X came out, Jobs wanted the developers to stop writing Mac OS 9 programs. He wanted them to move on to writing apps for the new OS, which was a big project because it was based on Unix. It's a totally different thing. So at the developers conference, there's this gloomy organ music, stained glass windows, a trap door opens in the stage, fog machine fog comes out, and up on an elevator comes an actual casket. He comes on somberly, opens the lid, and brings out a 4-foot-tall Mac OS 9 box, and proceeds to deliver a eulogy for software. I mean, the point was Mac OS 9 is dead. You got to move, but who's going to be dead? How well it could have been. Or did you remember that Apple introduced Wi-Fi? That is true. The first machine ever to have Wi-Fi was this iPhone, and the presentation was just unbelievable. Jobs had a cameraman over his shoulder, and he was filming the screen. Jobs said, "And now I have one more thing." And the one more thing apparently was surfing the web, all of this, NewYorkTimes.com, Apple.com, and the whole audience is going, "What? This is your big new feature?" And then he picks up the laptop and walks across the stage while he continues to surf the internet. And you can hear this roar go through the audience as they realize what's happening. There are no wires. No one had ever seen that before. And then he brings a magician's hoop and passes it over the iPhone. He was the absolute greatest show on earth. And then the last great story is how multi-touch came along. This is the team responsible for the iPhone. And in 2004, a little skunkworks team inside the design department had been working on the next generation of input. The mouse had been around for 25 years. It was time to start thinking maybe there's other ways. So they were fooling around with this product made for people with carpal tunnel syndrome. It let you type or tap or use the arrow keys with very light touches of your fingers, feather touches, so it didn't hurt people with carpal tunnel. And plus, the whole thing was a trackpad. So you could also move the cursor by swiping your finger around. And it was a multi-touch trackpad. So you could open something, for example, by putting all your fingertips on it and twisting to the right like you're opening a jar. So Apple asked that company, so Apple asked that company to make a laptop screen size one. This was going to be something for the Mac, not a phone, not a tablet, but for the Mac. And they wanted to fool around with it. So they set up a system where a projector they put a piece of paper over this thing, and then they shone the Mac desktop onto it from a projector overhead. And they fooled around with things like spreading two fingers and dragging icons with a finger, all the things we know today. But I will say that in researching this book, I read all the other books about Apple, and they are so full of mistakes. I mean, mine probably is too, who knows, but I did my best, and one thing I didn't do was continue the game of author telephone that seems to have gone on among all the other authors. This story keeps getting kicked around. This is from another book. The input engineering team had built a giant experimental system to test multi-touch. It was a big capacitive display the size of a ping pong table with a projector suspended above it. The projector showed the Mac's operating system on the array, which was a mass of wires. Well, guess what? I got Apple's archivist to send me a picture of this test rig. That's it. It was not the size of a ping pong table, it was the size of a laptop screen. That's the projector. That's this piece of paper taped on the eye gesture screen, and you could experiment. And there's, I can call that a massive diagnose 1 million people a year. It can detect sleep apnea, which is a sign of really serious things. It can watch your gait, your walking gait over time, and do early prediction of Parkinson's. They've been working 15 years on glucose monitoring in real time, so diabetics and athletes don't have to stick themselves multiple times a day. And the incredible thing is, they just put a heart rate monitor in the AirPods. The amazing thing is that your watch and your AirPods are picking up medical signals from other parts of your body, like your brain and your heart and your lungs, while it's on your wrist. It's absolutely spectacular. So, quick thing I thought I would mention, I can't be there in Texas, but if you are interested in the book and you send me your receipt and your email address and your mailing address, I will autograph a sticker for you, a book plate they call it, and mail it to you. You can slap it in there, just as though I was there to sign your book. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this book, or me, or Apple's first 50 years.
Yeah. Let's see if he could see. I can't do it very well, but anyway, we got a good crowd out there. So. Another 50 years. Another 50 years. This right here. Yes. Okay. Can you see this?
That's one of the ones I did. That's what it looked like.
Yeah. I'm doing it wrong, but I guess it doesn't. Well.
Is Tom in the audience?
Here's Tim right here. He's.
I just wanted to thank you, David, for sending this to me. I'm looking forward to getting your book on Tuesday.
All right.
So, yeah.
For pre-ordering that. That's much appreciated.
So, thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Good. Thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, anybody have any questions of David here? We obviously appreciate him being here. Come up here because David, we've got a microphone here, and make sure David can hear you right here. So come on up, come on up.
Speaking of this,
There we go.
David, my neighbor where I live, her daughter was one of the technical people for writing all of this technical stuff for Apple. And they were in a meeting.
Wow.
She's in Austin. They were in a meeting, and Steve Jobs walks on the stage and pulled out the iMac, or the Apple Apple Air, the Mac Air. And she looked at her boss and says, yeah, when they first came out with it, she looked at her boss and says, I guess we're going to have to go in the room and do a lot of writing today.
Yep. There we go. There we go. Anybody else want to ask David while we got him on the hook here? We're so excited having him here. I guess we don't see anybody else standing up there, but we got to come on up here. If you stand right behind here, David can actually see you too.
Hi.
So there we go.
Do you have any stories about like how HyperCard influenced like the internet and the browsers?
Or like why HyperCard went away?
Yes, I can answer both those questions. First of all, we know that HyperCard was an inspiration to Tim Berners-Lee when he invented the web. He said so. So that is how important it was. The demise of HyperCard is very sad. And it has to do with Bill Atkinson's deal with Apple. When he created HyperCard, he was no longer at Apple. It was a third-party deal. And he had to decide, do I release it to the world cross-platform, like Windows people can use it too, or do I ensure its longevity by insisting that Apple include it free with every Mac? And so he went with the latter. So the deal was Apple had to include it free with every Mac for 2 years. And Apple gave him a royalty on every copy, which was worth millions for Atkinson. He told me he remembers writing a check to the IRS one year for $1.5 million It was just the taxes. I think I needed a better accountant. But eventually Apple sort of lost interest and they spun it off to Claris, and then Claris sort of lost interest and spun it back to Apple. It just lost its advocates inside the company, and eventually it died away. But HyperCard lives on the web. There are 2 different HyperCard emulators, and it's so much fun to play with it. I made so many cool little games and mysteries with HyperCard. I'll never forget it.
There we go. Come on up here, Ed.
I don't know if you're near your keyboard, but years ago you appeared in front of a Mac users group in Dallas, and you had a song or 2 or more that made fun of Microsoft, and it was the melody may be another popular song, but I think we would all love it if you could do one of those for us today.
Right now.
Sure.
Yes, yes.
So typically music does not transform because can you still hear me?
Yes?
Okay. Oh, now, okay. So typically it doesn't work well over Zoom because Zoom automatically, your audio settings. Let me see if I can, it filters out, no, Ring Central doesn't, oh yeah, remove background noise. All right, so let me see, can you, if I play this, can you hear it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
You can hear that?
Yes, yes.
It filters out. Let's see, so, all right, here's the Steve Jobs song. It won't be easy, you'll think I'm strange when I try to explain why I'm back. After telling the press Apple's future is black, you won't believe me. All that you see is a kid in his teens who started out in a garage with only a buddy named Woz. You try rhyming with garage. Don't cry for me, Cupertino. The truth is I never left you. I know the ropes now, know what the tricks are. I made a fortune over at Pixar. Don't cry for me, Cupertino. I've still got the drive and vision. I still wear sandals in any weather. It's just that these days they're Gucci leather. I remember those song parodies, and I believe I did some for you guys logos many years ago.
Certainly, certainly. Well, it's time for us to wind down here. David, it is such a special thing to have you do our ending presentation, our big finale. You've made it very special. We've learned and been educated by you, and thank you for being a part of this final Apple Core of Dallas meeting.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to wrap up this incredible, almost 50-year history of this fantastic group. Thank you for coming out today and for being Mac fans for all this time.
Okay, I'm ready to go order a book. Take care. Okay, everybody. Our next schedule up is